Hi everyone, this is Module 16. This is a case study of the missing booster funds. A quick summary of the case study involves the principal, Mr. Stevens. He is the principal at Washington Middle School, and he questions the accuracy of the gate receipts turned in by a parent volunteer named Mrs. Alice Bowman. In the What Do You Know section, I kind of want to talk about the two main characters in this case study, and then there's a couple people that have small roles also. Mr. Stevens is the principal at Washington Middle School. He relies heavily on parent volunteers to support and supervise school athletic events. He values and trusts the policies and procedures that are already in place for school athletic events. And he enjoys a good relationship with students, teachers, parents, and parent leaders. Recently, he has denied a request to Mrs. Bowman for $798 from the PTA fund to pay for trip expenses to honor her daughter's accomplishment in cheerleading. He questions the most recent account of funds received from Mrs. Bowman during the last home game of the basketball season. And he has reason to believe that a $50 bill should be included in the receipts from the ticket sales during the basketball game. He notes that there is no $50 bill within the cash taken from the gate receipts. And he also notes that there are 10 tickets that were reported torn by Mrs. Bowman that would have a value of $50. Then we have Mrs. Alice Bowman. She has 3 children. 2 of her sons have already been through the middle school, and she has a daughter named Lucy who currently attends Washington Middle School. She's quite an accomplished cheerleader, and she recently got some all-state recognition and was invited to attend a parade in New York. Mrs. Bowman frequently volunteers at Washington Middle School. She recently requested and was denied PTA funds by Mr. Stevens in the amount of $798 to cover expenses for her daughter to be honored in New York, as I stated. She was one of 2 parents who was responsible for selling gate tickets for the last home game of the season, and she handed the bank bag with the remaining ticket inventory, ticket sales cash, and the accounting sheets to Mr. Stevens. She also is the one that noted on the accounting sheet that 10 tickets were discarded due to being torn. Then we have some minor characters. We have the Booster Club president. The important thing to know about the Booster Club president is that the Booster Club president requests at any athletic event that there are 4 parent volunteers. 2 of the volunteers are expected to work in the concessions, and 2 are to take tickets and be at the gate. Another minor character in this case study is Mr. Will Dumas, and he arrived late at the basketball game, and as Mr. Stevens was greeting him, he happened to mention that he just paid with a $50 bill at the gate. And then the final minor character in this case study is Lucy Bowman. She's the daughter of Alice Bowman, and she was the one that was recently recognized as an all-state cheerleader and invited to New York to participate in a parade with all other all-state awarded cheerleaders. In this case, what do I need to know? What I feel like I need to know is whether or not the procedures that were supposed to be followed were followed. For instance, were there actually 2 people at the gate during the night in question, and who was this other person? Another thing I need to know is, did the second parent volunteer sign off on Mrs. Bowman's note regarding torn tickets in the accounting statement? Is she aware of that situation, or is it something that Mrs. Bowman did on her own and no one else noticed? What are the exact policies and procedures in place for the 2 volunteers who sell tickets at the gate? I know some very minor details, but I don't know the specifics. What is the process for the handling of torn tickets? Do they have a process in place that either wasn't followed, or is there nothing to tell them how to handle a torn ticket? Is there a possible explanation for why there's not a $50 bill in the cash receipts? I can think of several reasons why it might not be there. That is a possibility. So just kind of examining are there any other acceptable reasons why the $50 bill isn't in the bank bag. I've assessed that the problem is that Mr. Stevens suspects that $50 is possibly missing from the gate receipts for the last basketball game of the season. And he's questioning the legitimacy of 10 tickets that were recorded as torn by Mrs. Bowman, and coincidentally can't locate a $50 bill he thinks should be among the cash receipts for the night. My plan of action. First, I would contact the district accounting office and report a suspected theft and request advice for how to proceed. And I do have other steps in my plan, but depending on what the district accounting office told me, then I would maybe need to adjust my plan. After I checked with them, for me, the next logical conclusion is to meet with the Booster Club president and review the current procedures in place for the handling of concession and gate ticket sales. I want this to be kind of an informal meeting, and probably one that seems like an annual review if I haven't had one recently. Just wanted to kind of get an idea, just checking in with her to see what her procedures are and see if I can support her in any way. Then my third action that I would like to take is to make recommendations to the Booster Club president regarding the reporting of damaged tickets, if they don't have something already in place, and shore up any other missing safeguards. So during my discussion with the Booster Club president, depending on what I discover in their procedures, I would offer some advice that might help them make sure that they don't have a theft occurring. The fourth thing I'd like to do is review Mr. Stevens' financial role in reference to both the PTA and the Booster Club Fund to ensure he's maintaining an advisory role. It's probably a good idea as an administrator to kind of think through your role sometimes and make sure that you are fulfilling the role as it was intended. It seems that Mr. Stevens is he's serving in more than just an advisory role. So I think it's time for him to kind of take a look at that. To resolve the issue, and thinking about what is best for students, I'd like to first remember that it's important that Mr. Stevens preserve his role as an academic leader. It's counterproductive to parent-student relationships for him to be making financial decisions solely for the PTA. I really would have liked, in the situation that was presented, that he would have, instead of making a decision, although he used wise, sound reasons for the decision he made regarding supporting Mrs. Bowman with funds for her daughter to attend that trip. But it really, in my opinion, it really wasn't his opinion. It wasn't his decision to make, and it would have been more helpful had he taken the request to the either the key members of the PTA or the whole voting board of the PTA. And obviously, if he's part of that, he would have a vote as well. But I would like to see him not make the final decision on his own. And then also, the Booster Club volunteers need to resume control of the deposit bag. It seemed like he was taking on more of a role than he really needs to there as well, so that he can work more just on his supervising role of the students and taking care of the students instead of having to worry about the deposit bag. Second, the students deserve that the money earned on their behalf not be susceptible to theft. They deserve that. They've earned it. It's been earned on their behalf. It should go to students. And finally, I'd like to encourage parent organization leaders to address any issues of suspected theft and help provide them with the safeguards needed to prevent theft from occurring in the first place. A little bit of debriefing on this problem. This particular case study has actually given me quite a few fits because I've probably solved it about 3 different ways. And every time I tried to solve it, I kind of ran into problems with crossing something I didn't want to cross, or doing something I didn't want to do. So I was extremely uncomfortable during this process, or in trying to solve it, and a little bit frustrated, and actually tired because I spent, I actually couldn't sleep thinking about this problem. And then I considered, am I overthinking this situation, which in my case is probably true. And then probably what I was valuing is, even though I know this is a made-up situation, for some reason I have a deep sense of responsibility to handle the situation appropriately. And I want to preserve relationships. So anything that I was going to do to solve this problem, I wanted to make sure that we weren't accusing somebody of doing something without truly knowing if they did it or not. I realized that Mr. Stevens suspects that that's what occurred, and he has some circumstantial evidence that might support that. But I think that this is you have to be really careful in making sure that through the processes or the steps that you take to solve this, that you don't create a bigger problem. And what I specifically didn't want to do was let people know that I suspected that Mrs. Bowman, or that Mr. Stevens suspected that Mrs. Bowman had possibly stolen the money. I really didn't want other parent volunteers knowing that through an investigation. I don't want the president knowing that unless I'm fairly confident of that, because the first thing that's going to happen with that information is it's going to get right back to Mrs. Bowman. So the most struggle I had was in trying to handle this in a way that respected all the parties involved, and especially Mrs. Bowman. If we were going to accuse her of something, I wanted to be sure that she had done it. What issues are still unresolved or open to further investigation? Is the $50 really missing from the deposit bag? Truthfully, I don't know if it's really missing. It's a possibility. Another issue that's unresolved is this the first incident of torn tickets being discarded? Is this something that's happened before? And if it has happened before, and it's possible, we have a whole line of theft that's been occurring for quite a long period of time. So we do definitely need to investigate that. And then the third issue I'm wondering about is, should there be a $50 bill in the bag anyway? I really don't know if the case study didn't indicate whether Mr. Stevens actually saw the $50 bill that he paid at the gate. I know he saw $50 bills that he was putting in his billfold, but we really don't know if he actually paid with a $50 bill. And we also don't know if somehow they made change for the $50 bill. There's several different kinds of things that could have happened that would explain why there's not a $50 bill in the bag. And the final thing that's still unresolved is considering whether anything else should be done in reference to Lucy and the money requested from the PTA for her trip to New York. I really still think that this probably should have been brought to the PTA instead of Mr. Stevens making that decision on his own. Not that they wouldn't have come to the same conclusion, it just would have been better for his relationships had it went to the whole PTA instead of, or whoever the voting board is, instead of him making that decision. Category 5, Component 1. How do you as the school leader promote effective and efficient management of the school or district? I thought Mr. Stevens, really is a very good leader. He knows and supports the procedures of the parent organizations. He stated that in the case study that he trusted that things would be handled appropriately, and it wasn't until he was given doubt that he began to wonder whether something was occurring that shouldn't be. He encouraged and welcomed parent involvement. He met Mr. Dumas at the door. He was friendly with those that he interacted with. And he also maintained the security of the financial assets and the facilities, because it stated in the case story that he locked up the facilities. So that tells us that he's got a plan and he follows it. Component 2, how do you as a school leader promote social learning of every student? Well, Mr. Stevens created a safe and welcoming atmosphere for all school-sponsored events. I can base that opinion on what I read for this particular event. I have every confidence that that's how he behaves during any other after-school event. And then also understands that the job of the school leader at the school-sponsored event centers on supervision of students rather than managing parent volunteers. Mr. Stevens pointed that out in the case study, that he, instead of spending his time managing the parents who were in charge of the finances and tickets and concessions, he spent his time supervising students, which is exactly where he needed to be. And he creates an atmosphere where positive relationships with students, teachers, and parents is the norm. Everything that we read in the case study indicated that he does all of the things that you would expect for someone that has a good relationship with students, teachers, and parents. And it isn't just him telling us that he has a good relationship with those people. It's what we read in the study. And we also know that he recognizes student achievements in non-academic areas, in that he recognized Lucy over the loudspeaker for the whole building when she got that All Cheerleader State Award. And it also said that he was proud of her. So you know that he supports all of his students, and he's proud of any extracurricular activities that they do, as well as academic. Category 5, component 3, the last component, how do you as a school leader promote student academic learning? Mr. Stevens encouraged and fostered non-academic event participation, as I've already stated, with reference to his participation in the after-school events and in his announcement of Lucy's accomplishments. You encourage and foster academic partnerships, which obviously it stated that he had great relationships with parents. And he ensures that the school is welcoming and that there is strong parent involvement, which was evident in the case study, even considering that it's a lower economic area and parents aren't as readily available as they probably would like to be, but they are coming out. And then remembering that the purpose of a school is to support all students in their learning using resources wisely. And obviously Mr. Stevens cared enough about the funds, even though I stated that I think that somebody on the Booster Club should be handling those. It's obvious that he cares about that and that he wants to use those resources wisely. And that's also referenced in the fact that he wasn't willing to spend the PTA money on just Lucy, that there were more students involved, that he felt the money needed to benefit more students, not just one student. That's the end of my presentation, and I'd like to thank you for taking time to view Module 16. And I'd appreciate any feedback. Thank you.